Alright, so the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X are finally here, and the whole internet is abuzz, and people are asking me which monitor or TV should they get to get the most out of their gaming experience. I'm going to break it all down, and that is coming up right now. Alright, so the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X are out, and I'm getting a lot of people asking me whether they should get a 4K monitor or a 4K TV. I'm going to try to break this all down and make the decision a little bit easier for you. Okay, so let's first start off with saying that both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X are capable of 4K gaming at 120 frames per second. Now, what is that frames per second? Okay, so that is the amount of times that the frame or image changes on the screen in 1 second. So 120 frames per second is very fast. Okay, and it'll give you a nice, smooth gaming experience. Now, for perspective, when typically we watch Netflix, TVs, movies, and things like that, you're usually watching that at about 24 to 30 frames per second. So a gaming monitor is sort of considered at about 60 games per second, and that's where you start getting a really noticeable difference. Going from 30 frames per second to 60 frames per second is very noticeable. You'll notice that everything gets a lot smoother when you're looking around, you're doing movement, much smoother. Going to 120, although it's very noticeable, it is noticeable, it's not as earth-shattering as, let's say, going from like 1080p to 4K. You're like, oh my gosh, the screen is just amazing, it's just crazy how great and how much more detail I see. But going from 4K to 5K, it's noticeable, but it's not as like earth-shattering. Okay, so 60 frames per second is a great target, and I think for, let's say, a casual gamer, someone who plays just once in a while, I think going for that 60 hertz or 60 frames per second in your monitor is a good way to go. I do think you get a little bit more bang for the buck right now with a TV, and I think that there's a lot of TVs now that I'm sort of labeling as a high performance TV because they're coming out with these higher specs that work really well with consoles like this. Okay, so another factor we want to look at here is a thing called high dynamic range, or HDR. Sometimes you'll see it labeled as HDR10. HDR and HDR10 are actually the exact same thing. 10-bit is the minimum standard for HDR. So HDR10 is just HDR 10-bit. Okay, so same thing. All right, and what that does is a normal 8-bit system will have you like so many millions of colors, but 10-bit actually adds many more colors. So when you're looking at the colors and all the vibrancy, you'll see a lot more contrast in the image, and this can actually have a nice benefit when gaming. For example, if you're like playing a shooter game, you're running down a corridor and you're in a dark alley, and like there's someone hiding in the shadow, you don't really see them there, boom, they get the drop on you and you're gone. If you had high dynamic range, you might be able to catch the outline of them a little sooner and maybe be able to get the drop on them, and it might give you a little bit of advantage. So HDR, definitely worth doing. Okay, 60 frames per second, I definitely think it's worth doing. Now, as for the screen size, this is really going to depend on how you like to play. When I do, like, say, iRacing, I have the screen like right up there. I mean, it's like I'm looking through the windshield. I like nice and close, and I really like a very immersive, and it's like just covering my screen. It's a 27-inch 4K, and it's just amazing in this screen, and I like that nice and close. And if you're gaming close, a monitor would be absolutely great, and you tend to get some really nice specs out of a monitor. You can get 60 frames per second or 60 hertz. You can even get the response time. Now, this is called response time. Is called, you usually see it labeled like G to G, which is gray to gray. So it's gray pixel color changing to a different shade of gray, and it happens in milliseconds. And you'll see like usually like 5 milliseconds, which means 5 thousandths of a second, which is super fast. Getting that number down lower to 3, 2, or 1 is actually much more improved, and you'll notice that the colors will now change. You've got the movement changing nice and smooth. You'll get the colors changing a little smoother too. But I think 5 milliseconds is actually pretty good. Now, one of the things with these performance TVs, you don't usually see the response time listed, and that's just something you're just going to have to assume they're probably around 5, maybe 4. Sometimes you'll see that they have like gaming modes, and if it says gaming mode, it usually means that that milliseconds is dropping down at least 1 millisecond. Usually, remember it was 5, it'll drop it down to 4, it kind of speeds it up a little bit. Okay, so that's something to consider. All right, so casual gamer, I think go with the TV. You'll get more bang for the buck unless you like to sit close. A lot of people do like to just sort of casually play. You know, when I actually play my PlayStation, I have a 100-inch projection screen, and it's actually running at 30 frames per second, and I actually think it's really enjoyable and nice gaming experience. Bumping that up a little bit to 60 would probably be a little benefit, and it's something I will be doing in the future, and jumping to 4K as well. Okay, now, as for like an intermediate gamer, now this is someone who's playing a lot more during the week, maybe they're playing 15, 20 hours a week, I think here you might want to consider jumping up to see if you can get to that 120 frames per second or 120 hertz monitor or TV. And again, this is sort of going to depend. If you'd like to sit nice and close, you'd probably be fine with a monitor. Although you do tend to pay a lot for a monitor, especially when you're going from that 60 to 120. You definitely, that money jumps up where you don't get that as much as in the TV, and you can obviously get a bigger screen. A lot of people like to play games, they have their friends over, and like a screen that a bunch of people can sit around. So definitely the TV, the high performance TVs, I think are definitely the way to go. But I definitely would try to shoot for that 120. It's going to cost you more. If it's out of your budget, you'll be super happy with 60 frames per second. It's really nice gameplay, especially with these PlayStation and the Xbox. That kind of gameplay is really great. If you're not used to playing like on a PC where you can run 80 frames per second, 100 frames per second, you're going to just think that 60 frames per second is great. So don't worry about it. You'll be happy. Definitely, if you can get that stat on the response time, you want to get that as low as possible. 5 is okay, but 1 would be ideal. So 1 or 2 would be ideal. But don't be scared away from a TV or a monitor with that if it doesn't have that, because that color shift is not nearly as important as the frames per second and actually getting 4K and HDR. I think those are far more important stats to look at. Okay, so that's that. Intermediate gamer, get the size screen that you like. If you like sitting around with the family, I definitely think a TV is easier. A lot of kids don't like to have to go through the PlayStation to put in Netflix and things like that, or the wife or the husband. You'll be a much better suited more family friendly with the TV, where you can just hit the remote, hit Netflix, go through the apps on the TV, and I think it's just easier. And you're not really sacrificing performance like you did years ago. These performance TVs are really much different than they were 3 or 4 years ago, where 3 or 4 years ago you had to go to a monitor to get performance. You don't have to do that now. These TVs are actually really, really nice, and they have nice specs to them. Definitely get a nice brand. I think that would be important. Okay, so we're a hardcore gamer. This is a guy who's probably playing 20 or 30 hours a week, and honestly, or more. And honestly, you've probably done more research than me. You've probably done twice as much research on this than me. You know what you want. You're going to definitely not compromise. You definitely want 120 frames per second. If you can get that stat, you're going to want that response time as low as possible. You're definitely going to want HDR. You're going to want here an HDMI 2.1 cable. That cable will actually have more power, more bandwidth, and get you the fastest signal from the console to the monitor as fast as possible and the most data possible. Definitely something to keep in mind. You want that HDMI 2.1 cable. Okay, what else here? So that's it. So that's my sort of breakdown. I think no matter what you do here, I think that these performance TVs have really changed the game here. I think manufacturers have realized that there's a lot of money in these gamers, and they're willing to pay a lot of money for a good gaming experience. So they've sort of upped their game and upped their performance. So I think that that's a way to go, where a couple years ago I would have said you had to go with a monitor for performance. I don't think it's as dramatic a difference as it was then as it is now. I think they're definitely up to par with the monitors, and I think you'll get a little more bang for the buck. Okay, that's it. I am going to put a link down below of a bunch of monitors and TVs that I've looked at. I've actually been doing research for myself for a couple weeks now, and I've sort of picked out maybe 10 or 12 that I think you'll be really well suited for in different sizes, different specs, different performance categories there. And check those out. They're all on Amazon, and I am noticing that reviews are starting to pop up with people who have the PlayStation 5. I haven't seen any reviews on the Xbox Series X and the monitors or TVs yet, but I definitely have noticed a few on the PlayStation. People are saying, oh, I got this TV and it's looking really great, and the gaming is awesome. So it's something to consider. Check out the reviews. Yeah, so that's it. Enjoy. I hope you get your console if you haven't gotten one already. There's a really high demand for these things right now. I will try to get mine. I'll probably get mine after Christmas. I'm not that pressed for it for Christmas, but I will pick up one as soon as possible. That's it on that. I hope you've enjoyed this. Do me a favor, like and subscribe down below. You know, it totally blows my mind. It gets me super excited to do another video for you when I see people subscribing to the channel. I'm really happy. I'm getting a lot of feedback and comments from everybody. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I notice my subscribers are jumping up. I've only really got serious about this channel like a month or two ago, and I've noticed it just like escalating. I've got 3 or 4 really cool topics coming up over the next week or so, and I can't wait to share those with you. But until then, I'm out.